following program is made possible in part by the Dayton Bar Association.
Jeff Swillinger. I'm your host this evening, and welcome to the 2019-2020 first edition of You and the Law. We have a very special guest this evening, and for many of you who have called in over the years, watched the show, maybe did both, or have done both, our guest this evening is longtime host of this program, Michael Monta. Michael, good evening. Welcome.
Evening, Jeff. Nice to be here.
And it's really nice to have you. We're going to dispense with a lot of background tonight about all the details of watching the program, and let's just let it suffice to say that if you have any questions about where the show is available, please, I direct you to DATV's website. It's Dayton Access Television, and DATV Dayton at DATV. And this program is live streaming, and we welcome your calls, and we'll be on a variety of subject matter. So with that said, Michael, again, good evening. Let's talk about you in so much as the program tonight is a retrospective on the program and also on all the great work Michael's done for over the last 25 years until last year when he was kind enough to ask me to fill in for him, and I'm still here. So, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff.
Michael, tell us a little bit about your history as a lawyer, how it is that you came to be a lawyer, your practice, and then we'll move into talking about the history of DATV, and maybe we'll get to those good stories before too long.
If there are some good stories,
If
yes.
there are. Okay.
I became a lawyer in 1973, passed the bar then. I wasn't a native of Dayton. I'm from upstate New York in the Chautauqua Lake area, but went to law school in Ohio. Graduated from Ohio Northern University, which had the distinction in 1973 of having the highest pass rate of any Ohio school on the bar exam. You can look it up if you don't believe me, I guess, but it is true.
Okay.
But then found a job here in Dayton, which was a vibrant and thriving city at that time with a lot of industry and a lot of opportunity for young lawyers, I thought. And worked downtown for a number of years, and then established a practice in what was then Clayton, or it was then Randolph Township, excuse me, is now
City of Clayton.
City of Clayton,
Okay.
right.
Okay. Had you practice by yourself at this time?
I'm practicing by myself. I practiced with a gentleman since deceased downtown when I first started practicing. My wife is also an attorney. She graduated in the first UD law school class in 1977, and we practiced together out on Old Salem Road, which is where I still am. We had 3 children who are all now grown, and she practiced with me there until our children were all in school, and then she became an employee of the United States government as a contract attorney.
Oh, okay. Is she still doing that?
She retired in the year 2010,
Okay.
And does not practice at this point, but could, I suppose, if she wanted to.
Okay. I hope she's watching this evening.
Well, if Channel 6 is working at our house, she probably is.
Okay.
So
And we have to leave some time at the end of the show because we want to say good evening and hello
Well,
to your
there, see,
grandchildren.
you buried the lead already.
Well,
You buried the lead already, so.
but there's no guile to my doing
No,
this show.
there is.
Or
there
to
is
me at
none,
all.
But we have a general practice, being in a neighborhood area. We're close to Englewood, Trotwood, Huber Heights. So we do a lot of family type of legal services. And when I worked downtown, I began in criminal law and have continued practicing in criminal law since then, both on the state, municipal, and federal levels. So.
And I hope we get to this as the show progresses, but I want to remind a lot of folks out there that Michael is kind of sailed under the radar in terms of the type of work that he's done, and he's being very humble here, but he's handled quite a number of very difficult criminal defense matters over the years, some very important cases, and hopefully we can get into that a little bit later if time permits. So back to talking about your career again. Do you want to tell us anything more at this time, or should we move on to talking about you and the law?
Well, we've had we immersed ourselves, I think, into the Northmont community and did a lot of work with the community up there. Worked in their mock trial program for a number of years. Many of our students that were, and it was fun meeting the youngsters. I guess you call them youngsters. Some of them are probably close to 40 years old now, but a lot of them who had no idea what career they wanted to be are now lawyers, not only in Dayton, but in other areas of the country. And I'm proud of that, and I'm sure the school is proud of that also.
So some of the then students that you mentored through mock trial are now practicing attorneys, and some in the Dayton area.
Yes.
Yes. Do you ever run into them? Do you reminisce a little bit about those days?
I have run into a couple of them who have said, "You probably don't remember me, but," and then
Of course you do.
Well,
Yes.
some I do and some I don't, and some who I did not know were that interested in becoming lawyers did become lawyers. So that was a surprise to me also, but a happy surprise.
Okay.
I don't think there's a better profession in the world. Well, I guess the world is the right thing. Than practicing law. It's you can help people, and you help yourself in understanding how human nature works, I think.
Okay. I want to remember that in those words in a few minutes when we get back to talking about maybe some of your cases. But let's transition over to how your career as a lawyer led you to this program.
Okay, well, there's a couple of things. One was my friend and comic partner. Maybe he doesn't remember it that way, but Mike Brigner worked. He was in Bar Briefs at that time, which is a legal magazine for the legal community. And after I had practiced a few years, it was one of the committees that I joined. And Mike and I worked on Lampoon issues, and I believe he was the chairman of the committee when I joined that committee. But I did notice that there was a deficiency in one area, and that was recognition of members of the bar who were not only outstanding in their field, but contributed to the community. So we began a writing articles. I always wanted to be a sports writer. Sports Illustrated's loss, I guess. But asked if it would be conducive to the legal community and to the Bar Association to write articles entitled Barrister of the Month. And they said, sure, knock yourself out. We've never done that before, but...
Explain a little bit about what that means.
What, knock yourself out? Or?
No, yeah. Means different things as we age.
Right.
But no, Barrister of the Month, articles.
Barrister of the Month would single out a person worthy of recognition in the legal community. And I feel more now than I did then that some of the great lawyers go unnoticed because of the types of practice they have. If you're in trial law, sometimes you get your name in the paper or you're on TV, but when you're working for your clients behind the scenes in an area which calls for a certain amount of proficiency, you don't get that noted recognition. I didn't think anyway. So we would try to find some folks that maybe would be interesting. It was good for me because I didn't know a lot of these people myself, being younger. And my only, well, it wasn't my only criteria, but one of my criteria was that the people had to be practicing longer than I did. So when somebody suggested somebody less than that, they were, by me, automatically eliminated. So
you'd select them and interview them?
I would select them, interview them, find out interesting things about their lives as well as their careers, and write a page article about them. And did that for approximately 10 years. Met some fine people, had some great anecdotes along the way, and had a good time doing it. And they're still doing it today, and we've had various writers from the legal community write about people they know, and it's continued on since then. So I started that in the late 70s, so it's a 40-year venture. Yeah, right, it is.
Okay. Now the committee, again, the Bar Briefs Committee.
It was the Bar Briefs Committee, right.
And you did this Barrister of the Month column. You were also involved in lampooning lawyers. And you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, that was another one of Mike Brigner's projects. At that time, the Harvard Lampoon gained some notoriety in the late 60s and 70s. And Mike thought it would be a good idea to maybe lampoon some of the lawyers, and would invite people he thought were funny or had a sense of humor to gather and submit articles. And for, I'd say probably for about 10 years, we did that. He asked me to work on that, and I had a great time lampooning folks or lampooning the law or whatever.
So for those maybe not familiar with the term lampooning, you were kind of making fun of.
Well, making fun of them in a good-natured way.
In a good-natured way.
I don't think we were ever malicious. There were only one or two detractors who showed up at the next Bar Briefs Committee and demanded retractions. And we said, well, they're all anonymous, and actually it's supposed to be an honor that you have enough notoriety to have been lampooned. So we sent them on their way, didn't lampoon them anymore, found better targets for the next year.
No lawsuits?
I'm not aware of any. But the last one we did was in, and Mike had long since stopped doing that. He became a domestic relations judge. A lot of you might remember that, and he was on the bench for a number of years and said, well, why don't you take over, which I did. And in the year 2000, when they blew up Reich's, which is good for the Schuster Center, but wasn't good for Reich's at the time, that appeared on the cover of our Lampoon issue of Reich's exploding. So that was the last one we did. And I think it wasn't for lack of ammunition for the issue. It just seemed like people didn't want to, I don't know how you put it, be funny.
Be made fun of?
No,
Be funny?
no, to contribute to it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So we sort of discontinued it, and the bar said it cost too much anyway. So it was a melding of great ideas there. No money and no interest.
No money, no money,
So
no
we stopped in the year 2000, but I'm sure that there's plenty of copies in the Bar Association office, which people may or may not have an interest in if you wanted to read the last issue.
Okay. Now, it looks like we have a caller.
Well, great.
Okay, excuse me. Caller, good evening. Hello?
No,
Yep.
no, to contribute to.
Good evening. I can't hear you yet. Let me suggest that the people. Here we go. It's gone up a little. Let's start over again. Well, I'm hearing. Hello.
Yes, I have a question for you two senior attorneys who appear to be older experienced. What advice might you give to younger attorneys today and to members of the public who might be looking for attorneys today? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
What-
As we explore it,
I don't know.
that
Well,
voice is. That voice sounds
That
familiar.
That
huh?
sounds like a good question
But
for
it's
the
a very-
host there.
it's a-
What advice you'd have for
You go first. You go
younger
first.
younger lawyers? And I'm getting
We're getting some reverb here
getting
tonight.
feedback. Tell him to move away from his phone.
Okay, you're supposed to move away from your phone if you haven't hung up already.
Okay.
Let's try that again. Mike, go
Well,
ahead.
my advice for, especially in criminal law, which is the deck is stacked against the criminal, whether they're innocent or guilty. The power of the government and the state is awesome. And so when you stand with your client, whether you have co-counsel or whether you have resources to investigate, it can be an uphill battle. Finding witnesses, if there are any, working on plea bargaining, which is, we discussed that a lot over the years on this program whenever we did shows concerning criminal law. And plea bargaining, of course, is not a dirty word. It's a way of resolving cases where the minds of the people involved, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, can adequately assess how best the case should be resolved for the public and for the client, him or herself. Now, they don't always agree because lots of times the penalties are great. If you watch the old TV show, Law and Order, you'll see that all the plea bargaining is done in the prosecutor's office. I don't think Matt Heck would like us invading his privacy on a daily basis. So we do our plea bargaining on the phone and whatever. But it's difficult. It's difficult to get to the truth a lot of the times, and the truth in helping again to resolve the case. Nobody likes to be incarcerated, for instance, whether they've committed a crime or not. But sometimes there's defenses, maybe self-defense or some mental defect or whatever. But there's a myriad of avenues which you must go down before you can come to a conclusion as to how best to resolve the case. And I have a sign on the wall in my office that explains this in a succinct manner, and that is, don't worry about the horse being blind, just load up the wagon. So,
Don't worry about the horse being blind, just load up the wagon.
yes. In other words, there's no definitive way. Well, when you do, say, like a personal injury case or a banking case or whatever, you know exactly where you're going with it at all times. But the vision of an outcome is not always readily apparent in a criminal law case. There's your horse being
Yes.
blind. So you put every single thing into a defense you can before you start down the path into working a trial out or working a plea bargain out. So you're ready for anything, no matter which way that blind horse is going.
That advice has served you well in your practice over the years, it sounds.
I think it has, yes.
Well, that's a very thoughtful, being serious, a very thoughtful and very complete answer. I'm not going to attempt to add or suggest anything else on that, as to that question. So I mentioned that you then transitioned at some point into becoming the host of this show. And while I hate moving away from when we're talking about cases and your view of the law, but let's at least get this on the table. And so much as this is a retrospective that we discussed,
Let's
get that out of the
retrospect
way.
some, sure.
Let's retrospect. So how did you get started with this?
Again, here's where Mike Brigner came in. I don't think I've seen Mike in 15, 20 years.
Nor have I.
He was always a person with a great sense of humor and egalitarianness, if that's a word. But this station was started in large part by a woman named Roxy Cole. There's plaques of her out there, and Mike had an interest in having
Another caller.
Well, we'll wait on Mike and Roxy. Let's see what the callers have
Caller,
to say.
good evening. Welcome to You and the Law. Hello?
Hello.
Hello, good evening. Maybe turn down your programming and we'll listen to you. Go ahead. Thank you for calling.
Thank you for taking my call. I'm a longtime viewer, and I appreciate this retrospective. Mike,
Thank
first
you.
of all, I just want to say nice haircut.
Thank you.
And, I've watched the show for many years. I don't think you've ever done a bloopers episode, but I'm wondering if you can maybe tell us what were some of the craziest or most unexpected moments in hosting You and the Law.
Did you say blooper before?
Yes.
Oh, okay. There was one that was interesting, and I don't know if our caller is necessarily in the law profession one way or the other, but in 1995, we did a show which was called Women in Criminal Law. Now, back in 1995, women were becoming more prevalent in all practice of law, but not so much in criminal law. They were steered away. But at that time, there were three prominent women, one of which was Mary Donovan, who had just been appointed to the Common Pleas bench, Deborah Armanini, who had just been appointed first assistant to the prosecutor's office by Mr. Heck, and Lynn Kohler, who had just been appointed as first female public defender. And I thought it would be interesting if the public gained some insight as to how they got in those positions and how they could pass on their experiences to women who wanted to practice in criminal law, of which now there's a proliferation of them. And partway into the program, we got a phone call, which we never completely identified the callers, but we think they came from the King's Table, which was a downtown eating and drinking establishment, and maybe a judge and a prosecutor and possibly a public defender were calling in. But anyway, the nature of the call was, I'm a man trapped in a woman's body. I've just been convicted and am going to be sent to prison. Where will they send me? So our guests got wry smiles on their face. Whether they knew who was calling or not, I don't know.
Whether it was a serious call or not.
And they didn't let on whether it was serious or whether and they all gave feasible answers as to the need for mental health or whatever. So after the show was over, we all had a good laugh and called down to the King's Table and congratulated our callers on helping the show.
Without naming names, were your guesses proven correct as to who it might have been?
We knew who they were.
Oh, you knew who they were.
Yes, and I will name them.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I haven't checked our liability here.
No, I don't think the liability is
but
a problem.
we'll err on the side of caution, just in case.
Was that blooper enough for our caller?
Caller, you still
That
there?
was a good one. I thought maybe you were going to reference your O.J. Simpson episode around the same time, but...
well, there wasn't any
I'm sure
bloopers with that, but the O.J. Simpson show was the very first show I did as host. As our viewers might recall, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were killed on June 12th, 1994, and the police thought it might have been O.J. So anyway, I thought, since I'm taking, and we had decided I was going to take over the show for the fall programming, which would start in October of 1994. So I gathered together some famous local people, one of which was Judge Richard Dodge, an infamous, we think, liberal judge, more liberal than most of them.
Very fine career as a criminal defense attorney
and a great
later judge.
Yes, and a surfer too, I think, from the University of Southern California.
Correct.
Bill Skank, who was a prosecutor for Greene County and had a lot of notoriety in murder cases. I think they did this spike case or the railroad spike case. Mm-hmm. He seemed like a likely candidate. And Chuck Smiley, who worked as vice president for NBC News in Los Angeles before returning to the Dayton area where he was from. I think his mother was ailing at the time and he came back to practice here. But three noted individuals in their own right. And at that time in October, everybody thought it's a slam dunk for O.J. He's going to be found guilty. All the socks evidence and the blood evidence and everything else that seemed to have happened were working against him. So we talked about all the aspects of the show, and at the end I said, well, what do you think let's make a prediction here, and I didn't know what they would say, but I thought they would say, well, the evidence seems overwhelming. And to a man, each one of them said, I think O.J. will be acquitted, and they each gave their reasons, and I ended the show, I think, with, well, you heard it here. After O.J. was acquitted, we did a show called O.J. Murder Case, The Aftermath, and they all came on, and none of them could fully explain why they thought he would be acquitted, but it was mostly a gut instinct. And they did talk about jury selection, which was in downtown Los Angeles, not in Brentwood, where it likely might have turned the other way. But
And in fact, the civil trial did turn the other way.
yes, in Brentwood. Yes.
Was it in Brentwood? Okay.
Yes.
But
So,
go on, please.
but well, that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
they said, well, our experience in it, we felt that this is the way it would go. And I don't think I could have found 3 other people anywhere during that time that would have said, oh, sure, he's going to be acquitted, including O.J., which if you looked at the video of him receiving the news that he had been acquitted, looked like the most stunned person in the courtroom. So. Again, not a blooper, but it was interesting to me to listen to these men of some experience, noted experience, getting it right as far as what happened.
Okay. Thank you. And both of those at their core, very, very important issues, very sensitive issues. If the call for the King's Table were to be made by someone today in a serious vein, that would be a very, very serious discussion to have. I think, and we won't go into that now, and the same here on the fact that Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered. So.
Well, we didn't get any calls from the King's Table on the O.J.
Yeah,
case.
no, I'm just saying, both very serious subjects for those listening. And
that have to do about cell phones now, because the King's Table is gone.
yeah,
So,
I understand.
So,
I understand.
let's see if our caller is satisfied with those answers.
Or has another
Or follow-up.
memorable thought on this. Any other suggestions, caller? We appreciate this call. No longer there? Okay.
It's okay.
Well, thank you for both callers calling in. We appreciate that.
Well,
We'll flip a coin afterwards as to who the first caller was. I think I recognize that voice.
well,
Maybe a member of the judiciary, actually.
if Sal Falero was still alive, and well, he could get into the voice recognition, but he's not, and he won't. So
That's a gentleman office in Yellow Springs, I recall, psychologist and lawyer both,
Yes.
who would testify as an expert witness
Yes.
in many trials.
so anyway, those were in 1994 and 95. And the state sponsored our program at that time.
So by that time, you had taken over the show from Mike, who did it a year, and
He
then
said I wasn't doing it anymore. I had done a couple of guest hosts for Mike in the years before, and when it looked like he needed to give the show up because of his judicial quest, which was successful at that time, he said, well, you think I've asked some other folks, do you think you'd want to do that? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? How hard could this be?
you now had an opportunity to lampoon the entire community, not just the
Well,
lawyers, right?
that's right. and of course, what I thought was I've been a member of the Bar Association since I started in 1973, but I never felt as though being on committees or things like that were things that I was very helpful at or very, very good at, but I thought this would be a way to bring news of illegal issues to the community and introduce them to some fine legal minds and show the public, and I hope we've accomplished that over the years, that you don't need to be scared of lawyers and you don't need to be scared of the legal system. And you know, we attempted to humanize all of the guests who were lawyers, whether they were judges or prosecutors, and I would try to get somebody on each side, if they were like criminal law or personal injury, things like that, you know, get a judge to get an overview of what the law is, and then maybe a prosecutor or defense attorney, or plaintiff or defense attorney for the criminal, to show how they strategize things and how they interact with the clients that do come into their office. And we encourage the attorneys to give the phone numbers of their offices, because it's hard, even if you do call into this show, you're not going to get specific advice, and I think we always said that, and I know you say that now. It's more for a generalized view of the legal profession. But if you have enough trust in the people that are talking on this show, maybe you'll have enough trust to give them a call and know that you don't necessarily have to come in and drop $500 and that's just hypothetical. I don't know what people charge. And almost every attorney that we had on said they would, you know, they're willing to discuss what fees are, and we try to talk about that on the show also, because except for legal aid and public defender work, there's a cost to doing it. It's the same as going down to the store and buying your groceries. They're not just going to load them up in your cart and send you on your way and say, have a nice meal. If you need legal assistance, there's an expectation that you would pay for the proficiency, as I said, that these men and women do have. So.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about how the show progressed and
well,
some
it's
of the
interesting.
guests,
Yes,
not
sure.
necessarily by name, but some of the other subject areas.
When we started the show, and of course, the set we have now is kind of like Meet the Press. It's terrific. I mean, we have a desk and we have the TV thing, and we have great cameras and great camera people.
All of whom are, with one or two exceptions, are volunteers.
Yes, and I was going to mention that they do have a very efficient group of people working here. They are training to be in the TV industry, and I never once doubted that they would do a good job on my show. And I had been on shows for some of the other TV stations in town, and this is right up there with him if it didn't exceed those. But anyway, back to when we started.
And you're focusing, when you say that, with all humility, I know you meant the staff, the full-time staff, the volunteers, and the people that we don't see on camera who make the show go. And
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. If it was just left up to you and I, there might be a light bulb hanging somewhere, and maybe a voiceover. I don't know.
I'm going to interrupt you. We have another caller.
A caller. Great.
Okay. Caller, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Oh, sure, we can hear you. You might want to turn your TV down, but we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I first of all wanted to say that I am a big fan of the show. I've been listening for years, and I wanted to specifically say thank you for a lot of the informative topics that you've put on, specifically the tax episodes, lots of great information just to listen to and to get answers from calling in. I was just curious, what were some of your favorite topics, Mr. Monta, to present on?
Well,
thank you.
We over a quarter of a century of doing it, we had probably as many shows on the fields of law as we could get in that people would want to talk about. But we also tried to do some themes which would recur in the public, and some of those would be like DUIs and drunk driving. So, and there's more of that, we thought, around the holiday season. So once a year, usually on the December show, we would try to get one of the municipal prosecutors, and we had some good ones, and a prosecutor and a defense attorney to indicate what you should be looking at if you're going out and partying during, and I don't mean partying by just getting completely inebriated or anything like that. A few drinks can make you a danger behind the wheel, not only to the public but to yourself. So we thought it was important. It sounds like we're doing it over and over and over again over a number of years, but a lot of times people aren't thinking of it except during that time of year. So we thought it was very appropriate to put it on, and if people happened to watch it, and they watched it before they went out for New Year's reveling, it would be helpful that they would know what they were up against. And you know, you don't have to be an alcoholic to be stopped for drunk driving. You can be casual, but it can ruin your life. It can not only ruin your life in legal fees, but loss of license, and that affects your family. You can have accidents, things like that. So we thought that was important, and did that once a year. One of our great defense attorneys in the DUI field, Larry Denny, just passed away. He was on a number of shows. Judge Tom Hanna from Kettering was on a lot of them. And in fact, he didn't think we were getting enough calls one night, so he called in from the desk himself with something that he thought nobody was asking about. And the prosecutors who came were very gracious about not necessarily wanting to take people's licenses away and put them in jail over the holidays, but to caution them that the law could work against them and their families, and all it would take is a bit of caution to avoid that. Another theme that we tried to bring up was around tax time.
Now let me interrupt you for a second.
Okay.
Do we still have a caller waiting? No. Caller who was just waiting, I apologize. I wanted Mike to finish his thought. If you'd be so kind as to call back, we'll do our best to get you in immediately. I apologize.
Yeah, don't worry about
for not being able to do so.
Don't worry about me continuing my thought. It'll eventually come back.
It'll eventually circle around.
Yeah, even if the show's over,
Even
it'll come back.
Well, go ahead.
But anyway, we did. We thought it was important to do shows about taxes, not necessarily just tax preparation, but deadlines, fraud, things like that. And one of our noted guests was Chris Cowan, who also had a good sense of humor, but was completely knowledgeable about the case and gave us all a lot of good advice. And there was one show that I don't think we got any calls, and I said that's because you anticipate every possible tax problem and and answer it before they can call in.
The you being Chris Cowan, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So those were a couple of the themes. We would try to do shows on updates in constitutional law, usually in January, February, and we would get some of our noted judges, Judge Jim Brogan, who is also an excellent athlete and golfer, would come on and give us a rundown of Supreme Court decisions. Judge Mike Mers, who oversees a lot of the death penalty litigation in Ohio and Southwestern District, and Judge Rice would come on, taking time out of what is probably the world's busiest schedule for any person. Of course, he just had his name put on the building, which is kind of apt for a person who's put as much as he has into the law and community. So those were some of the things, and we try to get family law and bankruptcy law. And each year is somebody trying to call?
We have a caller, or are you
okay.
asking that we speak up? Okay. No caller at the moment. Okay, please.
But the Bar Association has a monthly luncheons, which are called the Chancery Club, which they give members lunch for free, and we all get together, and it's probably the greatest outpouring of legal minds ever, I think, maybe for the free lunches. Not saying it is, but that seems to get us all together. And at the beginning of the year, they would ask if anybody has any announcements or anything to say, and I would get up and say, as you know, I'm a big TV star and I need programs. And after that, at the end of the luncheon, a lot of folks would come up and then say, I'd like to do your show. And that's how we got some of the shows. So.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm just getting some notice here about where we are, and we now have a caller again. Good evening, caller. Thank you for calling in.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Please.
First, I want to echo a previous caller and say, nice haircut, Mike. It looks good. And secondly, I did have a question. You've been on the air for over 20 years, and I was wondering if there were any topics that maybe you wanted to cover, but either couldn't because of scheduling, or you couldn't get a right guest, or maybe it was always an idea that you had that you wanted to do on the show.
Yes, there were some, and perhaps they were too controversial or too topical. In other words, we might do the show, and a month or two later, when people are watching it, because this show is replayed ad infinitum. There are shows when I did have really nice haircuts. From back in the kinescope days of the 90s. No, really, we had like 8-track tapes that we would, in fact, I've got them all in my basement now because they don't need them anymore now that they're digitized. And there were shows that I would have wanted to do that were in the forefront of the news, but again, they would have been out of the forefront of the news by the time they got to air. I wouldn't have minded doing more political programs, except for the fact that it was hard to get guests who were going to be, even though they were partisan, still impartial enough to give the other guy, the other guy enough time to talk about their side. Now, but we did do every 4 years, at least during the presidential elections, we would get a representative of the Democratic and the Republican Party to come with a list of candidates for our local viewers to consider and talk a little bit about them, not just the ones for presidential, because everybody knew them and the networks were covering them. But and when I say lesser candidates, I don't mean that they're lesser importance, but they didn't have as wide a scope of viewability, and that would give the viewing audience some idea of who they might be voting for in a certain district, or even the judges, which run as nonpartisan. And it's hard for them to get their message out because you're not supposed to know who they are, I guess. So that was as close as we came to that. I would have liked to have done more. I'm not sure the Bar Association, which took over sponsorship of this program about 5 or 6 years ago, they never told me not to do it. In fact, nobody's ever told me not to do any of these shows, but I just thought they probably shouldn't have, you know, they might have got out of hand, is what I'm thinking.
Those shows would be politically oriented.
They would be politically oriented. Now, we did have some shows where there were candidates for, we did a show, there were candidates for the juvenile court. The late Henry N. Kuntz was then the incumbent, and his opponents that year were Jeff Rezobeck, who later became judge, and Ralph Wilcoxon, who I believe was a magistrate in juvenile court at one point. And Nick, being of old school, when I sent him an email, didn't apparently know what it was, even though he kept telling me, "How come you're not sending me any emails?" And I said, "I've sent you 5. So we're sitting here, we've got Jeff, we've got Ralph, we're talking about the show, and we had called him, in fact I think Jeff called him on his cell phone. I don't know why he had Nick's number, and Nick was off at home doing something, I don't know. And it was raining, and it was one of the worst rainstorms we had that month. And about 15 minutes into the program, a very wet Henry and Nick Kuntz came in and seated himself at the table and said, "I got caught in the rainstorm." So, so that was kind of a political show, I guess. It was funny to me, but and they were all surprised that he had come. So,
well, we've got about 3.5 minutes left, and I had really wanted you to share at least 1 or 2 stories about your career, because before we go, I want to repeat what I had said earlier about Mike being one of those lawyers that he mentioned earlier that quietly go about doing very good work and kind of sail under the radar and you don't hear much about, but one of Dayton's longtime distinguished criminal defense attorneys. And I'm sure he's distinguished himself in other areas of law. I'm just less familiar with that part of his career. Do you think we have time for one story, or you want to just kind of continue.
quietly go away.
No. I tried real hard to get you here. Now that I got you here, I want you to tell as much as you can, my friend.
Well, you've heard some stories. I don't know. Has there been any we've discussed that
Well, more along the lines of what you told me you couldn't discuss, and really seriously to the audience, couldn't discuss because the nature of maybe the negotiations that went on that were key in the case, or the outcome of the case that better left unaddressed. But you have been to all the levels of the state court system, and you've been in federal court and the United States Supreme Court also, have you not?
Well, I visited the United States Supreme Court, and they sent me a registration, but I didn't think that I had any cases going there, so I didn't fill out the registration.
Oh, okay.
But we've tried some in Ohio Supreme Court and in our Sixth Circuit courts and things like that. So all the way from small claims cases that have some necessity all the way up to the top. So, and now that you've mentioned it, maybe I'll dig out that registration and go see Ruth Bader before she retires.
Before she retires.
Yeah.
Huh? You want to talk about any of the attorneys that you've co-counseled with, for instance, in any of the cases that you
Can I do
most
that in 2
memorable?
minutes?
Well, you can mention a couple names.
How much
I
time
don't
do
know.
I really have?
Yeah, according to the clock, it's 1 minute, 25 seconds and it's
Yeah.
counting. Why don't you just, if you don't think we can do justice to that,
No,
I'll get a
we'll never-
commitment
we'll
from
never.
you to come back again, maybe near the end of the year. But what would you like to add as we leave now?
If there's an outswelling of support, I'll come back. If everybody says don't bother, then I won't.
Well,
But I do want to say this. I do want to say this before I go, that some special people I think are watching, or they're going to watch the replay of this. So for Lily, Katie, and Everett, I want to say goodnight and hope you've enjoyed watching.
And just one more reason why I think this is such a special gentleman is he said goodnight to his grandchildren. And I buried the lead on that early in the show, but I just wanted to make sure you remembered to forget to do it. So between the two of us, maybe make one good brain for the evening. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure to be with you this evening, particularly with this guest of ours tonight, Michael Monta. Did this show for over 27 years, and as you can see, he's quite a guy. And Mike, I thank you for being here. I hope that you will come back in the future. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. Next show will be the first Monday of October. Good night.